Welcome, everyone. This talk is part of the online hackathon of the project OpenAgri, New Skills for New Jobs in Peri-Urban Agriculture. OpenAgri is a urban innovation action founded by the European Commission and coordinated by the municipality of Milan. And the objective of the project is really to explore different and new approach to agriculture and figuring out ways to integrate this into cities to make them more sustainable. I'm Enrico Bassi, director of OpenDot, a fab lab here in Milan and a research and innovation hub. And in collaboration with Naba, the Nuova Accademia di Belle Arti, we organized this online hackathon with the objective of exploring different scenarios. So the event really aims to investigate with students possible scenarios, future scenarios of urban agriculture through the method of speculative design. So let's think about the same issues from different perspectives and different point of views, and that will help us to be more innovative on the topic. To help us get inspired and thinking out of the box, today we are here with Henry Gordon-Smith, urban agriculture consultant, international keynote speaker, an AgTech advisor who started Agritexture.com back in 2011. So Henry, I'm very happy to have you here today. It's a pleasure to hear from you, and I'm very curious to see what you have to share with us. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Enrico. Thank you for having me, and what an incredible project, and what a great honor to be here to share some ideas from Agritexture and what we're doing. So, maybe to inspire all of you, since you're students and that you can make a difference, I want to emphasize that I started as a blogger. So I was studying political science, and I was looking at the relationship between policy and environmental change or responses to climate change. And I started blogging about things like water and technology, new urban planning strategies, and I started 3 blogs, and my 3rd blog was Agritexture. And Agritexture, really the idea of Agritexture is how do we integrate agriculture into the city using architectural thinking, practices like design thinking, or even some of the systems change thinking that you're going to be experimenting with. And so, that's really what I think is important, is that when we think about agriculture and how it can be brought into the city, I think back in the day in 2010, 2011, when I started blogging about it, it was severely underestimated. People said, oh, it's just community gardens, or the high-tech ones are too expensive. But in fact, if you start to bring agriculture into the city in an intelligent way, you can find specific wins. But in order to find those wins, you have to really run scenarios, and you have to kind of think about, well, what are all the different things I could do with this vacant roof or this vacant basement or this available parking lot? Who is it going to serve? What are the economics of it? What are the impacts on the heat island effect or the buildings around it? So it's quite complicated, because farming in general is already complex. We've got various inputs around the biomass, the water, the energy. When you bring it to the city, you have to think about how does that relate to the structures in the city, the community itself, the economics, the climate itself as well. So very, very complicated. So the way I pursued it was just to start doing research and learning about these different methods and trying to kind of weigh them sort of in a tech agnostic, unbiased way. What makes a greenhouse different from a vertical farm or different from a community garden? And so let me just show you a little bit about, what kind of stemmed from that. Let me just switch here one second. So again, this is I'll get to this in a second. But one of the things that stemmed from this was sort of a bit of a method, right? So how do we think about the options for growing food in the city? And this is a very simple way to do it. It's just loading here. You can think about it as technology or even investment, right? Low tech to high tech. On the low tech side, you have kind of these community gardens. Community gardens are very impactful on social impact. They can integrate immigrants. There's a lot of evidence of that from Montreal and Toronto that we can look at. If we get a little bit more high tech, we can start to get a little more commercial. So Brooklyn Grange is a rooftop farm, almost an acre, and they use special engineered soil. And again, it's still using free spaces in the city, which is a big benefit. It creates, infrastructure for the building. It creates insulation, and it manages rainwater in a city that really struggles with too much rain and overloading of the system. If we move to a little bit more technology, if we go indoors with greenhouses, even we can do this in low-tech ways, like Harlem Grown. And I call it a hybrid model because they have an outdoor soil and an indoor greenhouse. You can go completely high tech and let's say have a rooftop greenhouse, hydroponic like Sky Vegetables. These are all New York examples, but you could do this in your city as well. And the pros of that are that you're producing year round consistently, but it's not a social experience, right? This isn't a place that people come and visit and tour or have classes. This is a farm, it's a commercial farm. And so there are pros and cons and trade-offs to that. If we go to the high tech, really hyped up, exciting aspects of vertical farming right now, like aero farms, this is about ultimate control, using as much technology as possible to create as much control as possible in the plants to improve nutrition, to create wide, high volumes of products, no matter what the season is outdoors. And again, there are pros and cons to that. And one of the main cons as you get more high tech is that the cost is higher. And so the startup is more difficult for entrepreneurs. And so in some cases, that also means that you need a certain scale, and cities may not provide that. So this is one way to kind of frame your thinking. I mean, all I really want to encourage you to do is think about, what are the trade-offs between the different types, and start to structure your understanding, because that's where you start to say, okay, this model that I'm observing or this model that I'm designing fits within this bin, and this one fits within that bin. And that allows you to think about the trade-offs between them. Now, in regards to trade-offs, I just want to say one more thing about that. You can typically look at them from an economic, environmental, social, and aesthetic perspective. In some cases, you can also add health as an impact. So any urban farm or any theoretical urban farm can be judged by these 4 or 5 metrics if you want to. So essentially that pursuit continued. I was researching, the blog got popular, and then I started getting requests from entrepreneurs, and they wanted to basically design farms. They said, how much can I grow? And so we built Agritexture Consulting, and what we do is we advise on how to do this. And so our first years of doing this, from 2014 until 2020, which is when the consulting work began, was this. We created a methodology. We created a dream team within our company, a mixture of kind of architects and engineers, designers, growers, people focused on economics and sustainability. And we created a methodology. So this is Agritexture's methodology for planning urban farms. We go through concept development, and this is a very important stage where you actually do explore the scenario. So in concept development, we want to think big picture. We want to think about all the possible things we could do with the available site or the challenge at hand. Market research is used to validate that idea. So once we've narrowed it down to, say, one of the best concepts from 20 or 50, we can narrow that down even further by validating it in the market. Well, are people actually buying that product? Are they buying the crops we're imagining in this farm? Are they going to visit the farm if we're imagining that there's experiences related to it? Does the permitting and code allow for the farm? All of these various variables. Is there competition? Well, then we design the farm. So once that's done, and we kind of have our sites selected as well through the market study, we design the farm. So Agritecture designs every single part of the farm. Then it works an iterative process with economic analysis. So it kind of goes in this cycle. The design team designs something. The economics team starts to crunch the numbers for it. They say, okay, we need to make it cheaper, or the ROI isn't good. And we go in this cycle. So we continually refine it to reduce risk for our clients who are planning new farming ventures that can be quite difficult. And then we move into the implementation stage, which has its own steps as well. So that's really what happened with my journey. Again, the research practice that you're engaging in is very important, but you need to structure it around something and go through that. I want to share one more thing before I wrap up here, which is what we did after that. So as we got more and more demand for this kind of knowledge, we realized that a lot of the people that needed the knowledge needed it in a much lower cost way, right? So not everyone is right for consulting. Consulting is if you have a specific deadline and you are looking to build the farm or raise the money, then consulting makes a lot more sense. So what we did was really exciting. We actually took our models. Agritecture has the most models for urban agriculture around the world. We put them online. And so Agritexture Designer is our first software product that we launched in April. And you can do 10-year economic projections for greenhouses, vertical farms, and container farms completely online in minutes. So it's about honing your vision. It's about learning the best practices, like what's working. And it's about really building that plan and going forward. And we have classes on there too. We've got some online urban farming classes you can take as well. But what I want you to encourage you to do is just try it for free, because the first part of it is that first stage, is that concept development stage. So you just go in and you answer some questions. You can talk about who you are, what your purpose is. I won't do the whole demonstration. What's the purpose of your farm? You can talk about how big your team is. You can talk about what stage you're at. And I won't reveal it because I want you to see it. But basically at the end, you're going to get the key steps to plan your project. And you're going to get actually 3 example urban farms that already exist that are similar to your idea. So definitely go to design.agritexture.com and check that out. The first part is free. The next parts you can upgrade when you're ready to actually really invest in the right data and knowledge to plan your farm.
That's really impressive. It's also interesting to me how you create a service around it. So it's not selling hardware, but somehow it's connected to agriculture since the times of the first tools to farm something and to grow vegetables. And it seems that in your mind there's a shift on who is the farmer now.
Absolutely. One of the reasons why we're doing all of this is because I'm not a farmer, right? I didn't grow up a farmer. I grew up in cities like Hong Kong and Tokyo. And I was always inspired by how we can use urban spaces in creative ways. Hong Kong and Tokyo have really interesting parks and ways they've used green space or ways that they use mobility. And so there's so much room to innovate. And urban agriculture to me hasn't achieved that climax yet where it is integrated into the city in the way other uses are, but it can be, and there's so much potential for that. I try to think about it in that way. We also surveyed, so we do this global survey every year of indoor farmers, the high-tech farm I mentioned. 48% of indoor farmers have 0 agricultural experience. So, people are starting farms now that have not grown up on farms. And that makes sense, right? Because what we've done is we've pushed agriculture out of our cities because they used to be in our cities. And we've pushed them out of our cities over the past century, and especially the past 3 decades, and centralized it elsewhere. So even the knowledge security, when you talk about food security, I think about the knowledge security, the knowledge on how do you start, what questions do you ask, where do you begin? It's not in the city. We've lost that. We've moved that away, because even the generations before us moved to the cities and said, we want to be lawyers and accountants and finance people and builders and all this, which is fine. But we need to recognize that we cannot build the places we live without also building the resources we need to live in them.
That's another fascinating point. I mean, we used to think about industrial production and farming as dirty, smelly, heavy, tiring activities that we don't want to think about. And now we are coming back to make things, producing things inside cities, different ways of things, but also farming is coming back.
Yeah,
so
it's manufacturing. It's a clean manufacturing.
Exactly, and it's what we need the most, actually, food. So do you think that, I'm curious on your opinion about how the global COVID crisis changed our perspective on priorities. Do you think that impacted agriculture as well?
I think it's definitely impacted many considerations for us as individuals, and also at the city level and the government level as well. So I think in the context of food, what it has done for us, for individuals, is we've seen that there's a lot of increased demand for people learning how to garden and grow at home. I think that people have realized that, I want to eat healthier because they're worried about this disease that's out there is one of the aspects. We saw some interesting data about even smoking behavior has changed. In some places it went up, in some places it went down. So I think that there's kind of a consciousness about nutrition that's happened. I know many kind of hydroponic companies who have seen their sales increase due to COVID, which is encouraging, but the equipment and the ability to grow at home, that demand has increased. People searching for the topic, people asking me and asking Agritexture for it, for a lot of hobby and home systems has been compelling. What we also noticed is that, for example, in the Middle East, where we do a lot of work, COVID-19 revealed sort of the fragility of our supply chains, that they are, when you develop supply chains that are so focused on reduction of cost, you tend to actually have certain uncertainties within that. Basically, these areas where you don't know how dependable it is, you don't know what would happen. And so that quality gets affected. So anyway, shortening that supply chain is seen as a way to respond and make it more resilient. So throughout the Middle East, throughout the GCC especially, there's been incentives for people to develop new hydroponic farms to start to localize, start to develop a new economy around looking at the localization of food. So certainly that's been happening as well. Farms have had to really pivot. If you look at typical small scale farms in the US or urban farms in the US, many of them, especially if they're, when I say, let me give you some scale. If they're smaller scale, let's say they're under an acre, a production area, they have to supply restaurants typically. And the restaurants, of course, all closed. So they've had to sort of really pivot and shift to consumers. And so that's also revealed not only that, urban farming solves these problems, but that it actually has to adapt in its own way. And that the relationship to that consumers is especially important. But they were able to adapt in a way that other farms can't. If you're a traditional farm in Ohio, you can't adapt to serving consumers directly. But for the urban farms in New York City, you are able to do that.
So in the presentation, you showed us the range from, let's say, low-tech to high-tech companies. Do you think that, well, I think we can map the companies also on the scale. So DIY home or let's say building scale or city scales or even national scale. What do you think it's the ratio or how this reality can impact which area in the city? Do we need more small farmers or few bigger ones?
Yeah, so, in the context of urban farming, what's my vision for it to actually, be the right solution? Okay. I think that at home production, if you're doing it at an individual family scale, right, for most of us in urban areas, it's very limited. I mean, you don't have that much space in an apartment. If you're lucky to have a big garden or a house, you can grow a significant amount of food and even a wide variety at home. And this tends to be the lowest cost way to do it. I mean, it takes your time, but you don't have packaging, you don't have distribution. So as far as circularity is concerned, as far as waste reduction is concerned, as far as food miles are concerned, even nutrition, all of it can be better because you actually have the impact on health of engaging with the plants and growing. So that really would be the ideal. But the problem is that we benefit from density. So we don't want everybody to have a house with a garden. We do need people to have apartments as well. So collective community farms connected to real estate, I think, are a big part of the sustainable future as it relates to urban agriculture. If real estate developers can understand these models in a way that they can integrate them into lazy spaces throughout their properties, rooftops, sides of buildings, basement areas with high-tech hydroponic systems, and engage with the residents to harvest them and maybe select what they want to grow, there could be enough scale to justify someone to take care of it, a kind of master grower to manage it. So the quality would be higher, the consistency would be there, the aesthetic would be better. So it really starts to hit a lot of those impact categories in a meaningful way because you're getting the benefit of kind of lower cost product without the packaging and the shipping, and it's really hyper local. So I'd love to see more of that. We're working on some ideas for that in Dubai as well. And there are some projects in New York and Paris that are exploring that idea. Singapore as well are exploring that idea. So that's a good one. We definitely need at scale production. The population is significant. So when we're thinking about urban agriculture, we really need to look at these underutilized neighborhoods in the city that could benefit from the economic development of larger scale urban farms that do produce significant amounts of jobs, whether that's high-tech greenhouses, high-tech vertical farms. Those are going to produce the most jobs, or even soil-based farms that could produce, be economically viable if they're multi-acre size farms. So we're really looking for the peri-urban areas. These are the areas where we can leapfrog technologies, we can accelerate the economic development of those neighborhoods. So if you look in New York City, we've got a lot of at-scale farming happening in New Jersey, right? So just next to Manhattan, it's really so close, but it's an industrial area of New Jersey, and they get incentives there for creating jobs there. So I think, when we're thinking about the at-scale production, it's more of a manufacturing play. How do we integrate this into the industrial planning of our cities and neighborhoods? All the kind of in-between ones, I think, are different plays on, retail in some ways. I think there's a lot of exciting ways to integrate it into retail projects to attract foot traffic, especially in a post-COVID-19 world. So honestly, for me, the short answer is I would like to see data-driven strategy and variety. So, let's understand the canvas of our city and the available spaces. Let's understand all of the models that could be viable in our city, and let's run scenarios for that. And that's what we do at city scale. So if we're working with a developer for a master plan, we run through a scenario analysis where we eliminate models that won't make sense, and then we conclude what are the models that are going to be viable for those spaces, and rate them on things like carbon footprint, number of jobs, those impact categories I mentioned already. So it really is going to vary. New York City's future in urban agriculture is very different from Paris's and Singapore's and Dubai's.
So it seems like a complex analysis. There's no, let's say, universal answer, of course, to the situation, in particular in cities that are very complex, different one from the other. But it seems that, if I get it right, trying to make a synthesis, there's going to be a level of cooperation that is getting stronger and stronger, and more relevant and more important. And this level of cooperation very often is managed through technology as well. How can I create a community that works on the blocks area, or let's say part of the city size, without that kind of tool? So more in general, what do you think that it's really the positive impact of new technologies on agriculture?
Well, depends on the technology we're talking about, but on the farming scale, or you kind of emphasize like the community galvanization as well, right? Is it more that, or which one do you want to talk about?
Well, I think that community is a key point, so I'd like to hear your opinion on that.
I'll try and
in general, I'm curious to see what you think could be the game-changing technologies coming.
Well, I think first of all, the integration of new technology into agriculture is one of the primary reasons why we're seeing a renaissance. Young people are excited about engaging in these technologies. They want to be in high-tech farms. Even if they are soil-based, they want to utilize different technologies to plan and to operate the facilities. So if it has IoT, if it has a dashboard, if it has automation, people get really excited about that in this time of our existence. That's what we're interested in. And I think it's because we grew up in cities. And so we see that. We see technology all around us. We're on the cutting edge of it. So when we think about agriculture, we think, well, we could do it better with technology. And that's really what this renaissance is about. And that's where the investment is also going, is into these various technologies. So again, across software and hardware, you're seeing a lot of that happen. On the community side, the technology just, the internet and digitization and social media allows us to really connect in a way that agriculture hasn't before, whether it's galvanizing customers to support you, whether it's utilization of agriculture for food justice. We see a lot of food justice and urban agriculture activities happening across the world, but primarily in the United States, where food and race are very connected. So sometimes they have extra food, or they have a free fridge that they're giving out. They can use technology and digital marketing to get out there in a way they couldn't before, and the way traditional farmers have a difficult time doing, whether they have less access to internet, or whether because the density of customers that could visit them is just so much lower. So many new ways to engage in agriculture that haven't been happening before as a result of it being brought to be more urban and engage with that technology. The main technologies that are making a difference, on the high-tech side, is really this LED technology that has continued to advance. It's dropped dramatically in cost. We can now control flavor, texture, size of the plant without genetically modifying it. The energy reductions have become more significant. There are some that have different cooling strategies to make sure that the lights stay cool and the climate in the system, it continues. Automation is expanding rapidly now, but still remains very, very costly. But this technology will make a big, big difference, because labor continues to be the highest and most fluctuating cost in farms of all kinds. So automation starts to make a really meaningful difference on the bottom line of these operations that tend to have margins between 3 to 20%. So it can be a challenge if you can't manage that labor for sure. On the software side, there's a lot of talk right now in agriculture, especially in anywhere, about AI and machine learning. I'm not convinced that it's being utilized in a meaningful way yet, but because a lot of these high-tech farms, these urban farms, tend to have a lot of data points within them and sensors, et cetera, there is a future for AI and machine learning to make a difference in those farms. And I think that what that's really going to look like is optimization of operations. I would love to see it used in the future, big picture, that, you know, every city, even the city of Milan, has its own AI, and that AI understands where the city is going and growing, and also where the demand is for food. So that if I'm an urban farmer and I want to develop a farm, I can go to a website and it'll actually run scenarios for me or tell me what I should grow. So, you know, if everybody's growing tomatoes, that's not really impacting our food security. We need to foster a diverse set of solutions, including crops. So I would love to see that. And AI is being used for transportation in cities. It's being used for other industries. So it is plausible for agriculture as well. So lots of exciting, you know, steps on technology, but I think that's really the source of the renaissance in a lot of ways, is that you can grow indoors, or you can grow high tech, or you can grow connected. That's a big driver for this industry.
I'm curious on a comment on what you were saying about AI. I mean, the key point in AI is really data. So you think that this is feasible because we are collecting automatically data using sensors without skipping, let's say, the capability of the farmer to deal directly with that? Did I get it right?
I mean, I don't think we're there yet. Like, it's, every farm still needs the kind of the art of the grower. There's a science of agriculture, and then there's kind of this art of agriculture, and the art has not been digitized yet. The science is getting closer and closer to being digitized, where you can have, you know, smart assistants that teach you the things to respond to various issues, a pest issue, water issues, deficiencies in the plant. Those things are starting to be managed, but there's an art of observation and management that isn't quite optimized yet, and isn't quite online yet in that way. What I meant about the AI was more like at an urban, like at a city scale. And I think for planning, you can do it, because when we're planning, we use estimation tools like our software or whatever, where we're really, you know, we're trying to estimate what the yield will be. We know that the yield will fluctuate once it's in operation. We're trying to get as close as possible to that. So if a city has a goal and we have available spaces and we have energy, meaning enthusiastic entrepreneurs that want to get involved in it, there's some interesting data sets that can be used there to drive and accelerate the right response to that. So it's a sort of a problem solving and strategic planning tool, which is not the same as AI on a per operations basis, which is about consistent optimization and eventually, you know, reduction of labor as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
It's a bit conceptual. Let me plug my computer in, sorry.
It's not an easy topic, because these technologies lays on top of previous layers of other technologies. So somehow we think within other projects that we are bringing on, that it could also increase the technological divide. So
right. That's true.
If you have a technological setup that collects data, then you can access to extra services that makes you more competitive. But if you don't, that increase the inequality somehow. And I was curious to hear your opinion about that.
That is a difficult one. I mean, you know, as a white male, I have certain advantages already, and those translate to what access to technology and investment that I get. And we see that absolutely happening in agriculture again. We are already seeing a divide occur between the high-tech farms and the community gardeners. A lot of it is education-based. I mean, I've experienced community gardeners get angry at me, even though we work on community and all the way up to high-tech. They see me as part of this new high-tech trend, and I've been criticized because it's like, oh, you all are getting the investment and you're getting the money and we don't get anything. And that's like misunderstanding the difference between a private business and a not-for-profit business, and that different money goes to each of those. And New York has been giving money to nonprofits, but you know, these are deeply rooted issues around race and inequality that are extremely difficult. So what I will say is that the solutions are community. I mean, the solution to that is community, is to say we are one group of community. And we were at the same table with these individuals, and we did work with them to draft and to help pass the first urban agriculture bill that New York City has ever had, that made it easier for all urban farmers to be successful in New York City. So, you know, I think it's about making sure that if you are trying to change something like policy, or if you're trying to increase investment in your region. You have a responsibility to make sure that that is spread across the various types of urban farms. And that's maybe for a for-profit, vertical farm, you have no interest in sharing any of that, but certainly Agritexture has interest in that. So that's one example. Another example is the city of Atlanta, who we worked with, and they had this issue of 25% of the population lives in food deserts, and they're never going to get the capital to build high-tech vertical farms, but the city is really accelerating. I mean, it's one of the best places to do business in America, lots of investment coming in, and they want to attract big high-tech greenhouses and vertical farms to come in. They want both. So what did we do? We created Aglanta. Aglanta is a website, a community portal to talk about this. What are the differences between these types? How should you think about where you can go? What are the workshops you can access? If you're a person of need that wants to learn about hydroponics, you can get access to free workshops versus somebody that has to pay for them. So that's how we start to equalize that. And we had an annual event every year. At that event, we made specific intentions to have enough diversity of speakers in sex and race, and also diversity in the types of agriculture they were pushing. Even though for us, if we had just gone to high-tech agriculture, we would have made more money off the event, right? Like we would have been able to sell more sponsorships, but instead we tried to create this diverse discussion. That's the problem, is a lot of people, want a simple answer, but the fact is, to encourage diversity, you have to kind of embrace that complexity, and that's really hard. But that is going to be an ongoing challenge, especially as automation technology advances even further. The gap between, simplified greenhouses and soil-based urban farms and these high-tech farms is going to really widen. I mean, the ability for those farms to supply all of the restaurants, all of the supermarkets, is going to really start to compete with these ones. Now, where these can compete is they're always going to have a brand of community that's not going to feel like a corporation. These ones are always going to have the downside of being they're eventually going to appear to be scary Amazon-like corporations, and that has consequences for them. So what we have to protect here is that community, because that's what's going to keep people coming back to these farms and supporting these farms.
So you were talking about community, and I think that part of the community is also who's going to buy the products and why they're going to buy the products, and how these people can be engaged, from buyers to eventually users or partners, and contribute, in particular on the community level, of course. So do you think that there is a role in technologies in involving them as well? We talked a lot about gamification or other approach that can be used.
Yeah, I haven't seen great successful examples of it yet, but there are some cool ideas out there. I think some of the simplest ones is like GoFundMe, right? Crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is not uncommon in the funding of consumer products for hydroponics, or even community gardens. Sometimes gardens have to move because their leases end, so they'll kind of crowdfund for the farm to move and kind of start over. So that's a use of technology in some ways to do that. Another example that's kind of interesting is there's a group called 1.1 out of San Francisco, one of the high-tech, very automated vertical farming companies. And I was happy to see that they're implementing an idea that we came up with I'm sure other people came up with it too, but in a workshop we had done in Las Vegas years ago, maybe 5 years ago, we did this workshop, and one of the teams came up with an idea to lease out the farm. So I can turn on my phone, I can see what's happening in the farm and look at my plot, like my farm plot that's occurring in there. So instead of buying product, you're renting land inside of a farm, which is a different idea than just buying the product from the store. So I think that's another interesting way of how technology can connect with the consumer and kind of create this community related to the farm, and gamification as well, right? Because you can kind of check on it and you can kind of see what you feel about it. Another one that's not really, gamification necessarily, but it's playful. Our client Square Roots developed a blockchain technology where they trace the product. So they take pictures of it every single step of the way, from seeding all the way to the store, and you scan it and you can see that entire journey again, and you can see the farmer, and you can see this, the technology was grown in. So that's fun. And that's, again, a really cool way that technology can connect you to something that, because the high-tech farms, you really shouldn't go inside of them. So you need to have some kind of virtual way to connect with them if they're commercial, you don't want to disturb them and potentially bring in pests. You know, one idea that I was always thinking of when I was studying sustainability was, I called it green unions. And it was the idea that you would, on a block by block basis, you would fundraise for green initiatives. So let's say your roof, the building you're on next to me, is better for solar panels, has better solar access. But my roof actually is pretty sturdy, has a good structure. So maybe it's better for a community space that we create where people can hang out. And then another person has some space more on the ground floor that we can create new composting solutions and things like that. So we can kind of, you know, each of us in the community as part of the city block can contribute ideas and then crowdfund the solutions to essentially develop our own self-sustaining block, because on a per building basis, that's difficult. So that's an idea that I've never implemented, but you know, that would kind of have a gamification thing where you kind of vote and raise money for it. And the city could even match it if they wanted to encourage it, right? The best ideas could be matched by city money that could make them materialize. But the point is to kind of get people working together on a journey to greenify to green their whole community, make them more self-sustaining.
So if you had to point out some scenarios, future feasible scenarios that are not maybe there yet, what do you think it could be in cities in 2022, so in the near future, or 2025? What are we going to see?
More broadly about society or specifically on urban agriculture?
Specifically about agriculture.
Yeah. We're definitely going to see many more investments into these vertical farming companies over the next few years. That will continue. COVID-19 has only accelerated that. But we will see some of the bubble burst. There's been a significant group of people that have been you know, riding the hype of vertical farming as a food security solution, which it is not. Vertical farming is not a food security solution on its own. It is one part of a complex puzzle of encouraging food security, which food security is about, you know, adequate food, you know, availability of food. It's about the appropriateness of the food. So it's a very difficult thing to achieve. So, you know, there will be failures, big failures, I think, for some of these big vertical farming companies. Some of them will run out of money. Some of their technologies won't perform as expected. And then you'll start to see this next generation of farmers start to even develop from there. I think the integration to real estate will start to happen, although I don't know if it's going to happen before 2022. I think it's going to be a bit longer before that takes off. We're going to see more variety. So one of the exciting things we see is there's going to be more berries grown in these farms. You'll start to see berries probably sold in stores from vertical farms, which will be interesting. I think you're going to start to see them experiment with crops that you haven't eaten before, just to test out because they want to differentiate in the market. And so you may start to experience new flavors as a result of these urban farms. I think that you're going to see more city policy develop around this too. You know, what Paris and New York have done, Atlanta has done, more cities are watching that. We have cities approaching us to use our software actually to run competitions. So you could have a number of sites and then the users use that to kind of think about what they want to do with the site. And then the city gets all these very clean, organized business plans and economic models. So I think we're going to start to see more of that. I mean, we're going towards a future of more uncertainty and scarcity. So I think that, you know, that is going to drive a lot of responses to this, a lot more variety to it. But I've been doing this for 10 years now. I haven't seen any slowdown in the enthusiasm for urban agriculture across the board from investors or from city leaders or from young people and entrepreneurs. So I don't know, maybe Gen Z won't be interested in it, but I doubt that. So, you know, we'll see what happens, but I think that enthusiasm and the kind of creativity and variety on that is going to continue. I will say one more thing, you know, prior to COVID-19, I participated in kind of a visioning of the future exercise at Windsor Castle with an organization called Future IQ that does a lot of scenario planning. And the final scenario we came up with that was the most likely was this scenario of sort of these clusters that people will live in. You know, you think about like a gated community, that in a world of more uncertainty, we are going to start to want to create sort of our clans, places where we feel safe, places where we have similar ideas, unfortunately. And so those will also foster a self-reliant culture around agriculture that will be interesting. So I'm watching very closely how real estate developers, how retail developers respond to COVID-19, because that could be that major shift. I think, fear of terrorism, various fears around inequality have driven that direction already. But I think that we're going to see more of those kind of enclaves sort of develop, which is not really the future I want, but there is a role for urban agriculture in those that could be interesting.
So to balance out this point of view, that it's very interesting, and you were talking also about possible business models, so how to make things sustainable. On the other hand, it's nice to think about quality of life and how healthy our community are gonna be,
Right.
well balanced, integrated. So how do you think that we could push and nudge this kind of improvements using urban agriculture as a way to get together or create communities?
Yeah, I think that urban agriculture is a really viable and effective tool to integrate communities and populations in cities. And I think that most of the time that happens through low-tech solutions, soil-based solutions, community plots, not necessarily things that are particularly new. What can be made new about them is the use of technology to galvanize people, to get people there, to help them manage it properly, to help gamify the experience, right? Like maybe you're competing with your neighbor for the best eggplant or whatever it is. But just, playing with these ideas and innovating them. And students can have a big role in this because they're on the cutting edge of technology and ideas. And as far as the approach of soil beds, or you look in Berlin, in Paris, even in Brussels, there's some amazing examples of community-based farms that even have some for-profit models where it's kind of a combination between a community use, a restaurant use, and actually engages in circular economy and has art. They're really beautiful spaces. If you look at Tempelhof, there's some cool urban farms there, or the Prinzessengarten in Berlin, really good examples of this. So you can use these spaces to be art spaces, to be public spaces that have an additional benefit of producing some food. And I think that's a really big win-win-win, especially if you've got immigrant populations, newcomers, wealth inequality. When you're doing something as opposed to just being somewhere, right? Like if you're in a park and you're all sitting somewhere individually, are parks integrating us? Why or why not? You might want to ask that question. What would make a park more effective at integrating the population? How do you get a park to make you talk to somebody? Well, I think one way is to have you do something. And so urban farms can do that. They can have activities for you that foster that integration, because integration really only happens when you're in the same place and you're actually looking at each other and communicating. And I think that urban farms can deliver that. So, maybe revisiting how we do parks and how we integrate urban agriculture would be a good way to do that. I think you can do it on the high-tech side a little bit. I had one idea for Berlin where you would do like a sort of, greenhouses are typically very square. You use sort of like linear greenhouse that sort of like represents a bit of a response like to the Berlin Wall or whatever, something like that. And so you could have little pods on it that you rent out during the day. And when you rent out the pod, it's like a workspace or a social space with your friends, but that money goes to support the operation of the farm, which is like a sort of long art kind of project greenhouse. Again, never got that done yet, but we'll see. So there's ways you can integrate it. Think about these apps where you book spaces, you can integrate that. And certainly, urban farms are places where people have weddings, they do yoga, and there's so much going on them usually.
It's nice that you point out that to socialize, we need to be in the same place. After these months of digital connections,
yes,
there's still need to face-to-face conversation.
Totally. I mean, it's changed me entirely. I was stuck in Oman for 4 months, and I was interacting with very few people. I mean, many of you have been on quarantine as well. But to get back to the Czech Republic, to somewhere that has more of my own culture, to be with my family, even as somebody who travels a lot and is used to it, it has re-energized me in a way that I didn't quite expect. So it's a real thing that we need.
We spoke a lot about different scenarios and possible futures of urban agriculture. I'd like to close this asking you, what do you think are going to be the main challenges to overcome? Cultural, technological, political, on the policies, on certification. lack of business model, whatever kind of challenge you think, and the opportunities on the other hand, not just producing food, as you were saying, but socializing to recover some from lack of social interaction or reuse spaces that are not used. What do you think?
Yeah, look, a lot of the things I said, especially if we're thinking about trends, you know, you want to be careful not to generalize, because climate really matters when it relates to agriculture, and so does the buying power of the consumer in that region. So there's many localized variables that, again, context matters. But just taking a step back, yeah, I think the skills gap is probably the biggest global issue as it relates to this. As we've urbanized, we've basically lost the skill to plan and manage and operate our own farms, especially when we're urban dwellers. So we have to catch up, and that is not something that happens quickly and easily. And it's something that should happen in an equitable way, as you mentioned, for those groups that we don't want left behind. So there should be training programs, you know, for urban agriculture. And there are classes and things you can take, but they should be more integrated to include what are the possible ways to do it, what's the relationship between technology and this, what's the relationship between, again, society and the environment and this. And so, you know, there's not a lot of agriculture talent coming out of cities beyond the kind of tech-minded CEO that's starting these facilities. So, you know, how do we get actual growers to develop? That's a skills gap. In the Middle East, it's one of the biggest issues, is that they have a lot of funding. They just don't have a history of agriculture and technology. They don't have a lot of talent. So they can't keep importing that talent to run these farms. That's going to be a big issue. In some places, you may have an abundance. Like I think in Paris, there's actually quite a bit of an abundance of people who know how to grow food. So, you know, that works their advantage. I think that's one of the biggest challenges. The other big challenge, I would say, is just recognition. Cities still don't, it's still the same problem as 10 years ago. I mean, it's gotten so much better, but they still don't understand the true value of urban agriculture in a city, or what the difference is between these various types and how that shifts that impact. And until urban planners and architects really understand it, and that's what we're trying to do with this tool, and what we're trying to do with all our work is give them the assets to be more confident with it, and do what they're doing with green roofs. For example, green roofs, they're now confident in them enough where they know that they can create citywide plans. That's what we need to do for urban agriculture. It needs to be as easy as green roofs. And I think we can get there, but we're not there yet. Great opportunities. You know, the biggest opportunity around this is the fact that consumers care. You know, people want local food, they want healthier food. And so you have an opportunity when you're starting an urban farm to really observe what the trend is in your neighborhood, in your city, and how you can supply them with that. And any business is successful when it identifies a gap and fills it effectively. And urban farms can do that. So I think that's really the greatest opportunity around it. In addition to the fact that, you know, we can actually provide 10% of our global food supply of fruits and vegetables can be grown in cities. And around cities, we're talking about at least 50 to 70% within 100 kilometers that could be grown. So we can be quite resilient from a fruits and vegetables perspective with urban farms if we really did focus on it.
That was amazing. Thank you very much. Very inspiring chats, and it really brought on the table a lot of different point of view, starting from the fact that farming is not easy.
Super difficult. Yeah, it's so much harder. I'm humbled all the time by the people that actually do the daily work. I'm humbled by them. You know, it's much easier for me to talk about it and to help them plan it and do all of this, but they're every single day pretty much doing it. And yeah, they're really incredible. We should always support and respect our farmers.
And on the other hand, they really have an impact. So it's really feeding us. So while we work with ideas and innovation, and that's very fun and that's very clean, to be honest. It's nice to remember that there is a layer that allows us to do all of this. So thank you again, Henry Gordon-Smith, Urban Agriculture Consultant, international keynote speaker, and AgTech Advisor. And we heard a lot of you from a lot of advices from you during the last hour or so, and a leader of Agritexture.com. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Enrico. Thank you for having me. And good luck, everyone. Have a good time. Come up with some great ideas. Let your mind go. And we need your help to change the world together. So thank you so much.
Thank you.